device, say a ventilator or a wearable device that would solve the problem. So you would require a complete immersion process from the beginning, from identifying a problem to deploying the solution. So there's a lot of immersion, clinical immersion and refinement which goes through the process. So first I will be giving a walkthrough of what basics of how to innovate in terms of medical devices, how you can basically, medical devices is very huge and you can go on and on for days in how to go about finding problems, or there are many problems to solve. And I'll be giving a basics of how to go about in basically in identifying certain problems that falls under that important factor that you could go about solving. So the process of innovating medical devices, it starts with problem identification, need analysis, screening, the concept generation, the concept selection, development, deployment, and so on and so forth. So, for example, if you look at any company like a company which is working on a specific need for maternal and child health, or a company which is working on specifically for diabetes, they started with a problem statement. So the problem statement could be, any one of you might have certain interest towards working on a particular problem, diabetes. So it could be some problem that your parents or your relatives could be facing, and this particular problem you are inclined towards solving. And you should be looking at how you can get some of this expertise, and medical device development involve a lot of skill sets. So it is always a teamwork which comes into place when you are going about developing a process. So a medical device typically takes between 2 to 4 years, 5 years, depending on the type of regulatory classifications and so on and so forth. So you would start with idea. So you will start with an idea process. So you find a problem and you go about writing down the problem statements and finding that specific problem statement that you want to solve, and coming up with the need statement and the need specifications. So need specifications could be the when you go to a hospital nearby in IIT Ropar or any hospitals like AIIMS. So you would see a lot of problems. You would find the problems are like an ocean. But you document in certain way that you specifically identify certain specific things that are pain points, certain gaps that you would find in those processes, and you would see how you could bridge these gaps with specific need statement analysis. So the concept of developing medical devices, it would basically have certain iterations, and it could go about developing initial prototype 6 months to 1 year. It would have identifying the specific need and screening them and developing that initial proof of concept with the concept generation and screening. You could be coming up with different ideas, like 10 different problems. One problem could be finding the risk level for a pregnant woman who is having labor period. Or a problem which is something related to child health, where you wanted to track the distress level of the child and send alert to some patients' caregivers. So you would go on and on. The innovators usually jump into solutions, but that is not the right way to develop medical devices, and the innovation process itself is very different from what is conventionally available in the general market. So if you look at the companies like GE, healthcare, all the big companies, they have traditional products, and they are pretty much sophisticated. They are high. They are very high expensive, and they are not affordable by general population. And when you look at the problems that are faced in general population, like in India, the socio-economic strata, so you would find most people are not able to afford these big hospital costs because the ventilator costs or the equipment costs are so high. So it is basically going to the patient who is getting that treatment. So as an innovator, it is our job to identify certain problems and how we could fix the gap. Whether it is going to a government hospital where you can accommodate certain low cost innovations. So all these things you would only figure out when you go through a process of identifying, inventing, and implementing. So initially, you would start with need finding. So need finding is a process. You would basically need to understand what are the essential things that you, in order to innovate a product, in order to invent, and in order to deploy, you need to understand the market dynamics. Further, even if the problem is something that is worth solving, even if there is a huge need for that, but if there is no market, there is no point in trying. So you need to first understand what is the market opportunities and how you can apply your design thinking process in building a solution once you come up with the refined need statement and problem statement and so on and so forth. So you need to understand who are the target audience. If a problem is specifically for the low income families that you are developing, so this can be pretty much be deployed for very secondary care hospitals or very low income states. So you need to define those things. So one of the things that while defining a problem statement, need statement, you need to understand is that if you are defining a problem statement or a need statement for a broader audience, the chances of designing a solution would be much more broader. But if you are focused on specific solution, or if you are focused on specific problem, and you are developing a need statement and a need specification, your problem would end up being a very limited solution. And when it comes to a market, you would basically find that your problem is not solving the wider audience. So it is important to understand that when you are going through the process of developing medical devices, you need to take into considerations like regulatory things, whether you would go through certain regulatory criteria. You'll have to get CE certification, FDA certification, CDSCO certifications, and all these things takes time. And you'll also need to see whether who is willing to buy the medical device and whether the stakeholders are going to accept it. So all these things will take time. So the primary thing that you need to remember is it is not about just developing a medical devices for the sake of developing medical devices. It is going to change the lives of people who are having certain health problems, and it is going to improve the quality of life. It is going to bring sometimes it's going to save lives. So it depends on the problem that you're solving. But at the end of the day, any device that you are developing, it has to solve a problem. It has to go to the patient. That is the primary objective. That from the day when you are developing medical devices, you need to understand that this is going to benefit the patient. So that is the mindset that an entrepreneur should have while designing a medical device. Okay, so as a medical device entrepreneurs, we can have this more interactive. So what is your aspirations? Do you want to become an innovator? Do you want to become a medtech entrepreneur? Start some new medtech startups? If that is the case, you need to know what is the industry practices. You need to know what is the way the market works. You need to know how the way things work in the actual market. So in order to know that, you would have to do specific market research, speak with existing stakeholders and identify the need, speak with patients as well, go to hospitals and different needs. Then you know that what is the clinical need, and you would basically add all the problem statements and see what problem that you are more inclined to, what problem that you have technical expertise, and what are the things that, what are your strengths, what is your weaknesses, and how you can incorporate some of these strengths and the things that you don't have, how you can partner with some other fellow entrepreneur, or collaborate with someone to develop a medical devices. So it always happens with collaboration, it always happens with partnership, and you develop your first medical device that solves the problem. So when you develop a medical device, so initially you would end up with a initial proof of concept, which you will have to test it and validate it, and then you will have to take it to the next level by going to clinical trials. After you have your device meet certain regulatory standards, getting ethics approval in hospitals, and then you would go about getting your quality certifications and regulatory compliances and so on and so forth. So if you are developing a screening, if you are developing a diagnostic devices, your device would fall under certain classification depending on the risk level. And if your device is somewhere between therapeutics and monitoring, it might fall under certain classification. So depends on the risk of the device, your device will fall under certain classification. So you need to check the CDSCO, Central Drug Administration, what classification of regulatory standards that your device falls under. Because if you wanted to have your device being deployed in market, and you need to know what is the primary market that you are targeting. If India is going to be the primary market that you're going to be targeting, so you want to make sure that what is the classification, what is the what is the regulatory pathway that you have to take. For example, we have developed a device which falls under catheter. So catheter falls under class B, so you would have to do clinical trials after getting ethics approval. Before that, you will have to do a test license, which is you'll have to get regulatory approvals to get test license, which means that to manufacture certain quantities of medical devices, you will have to get permission from the central government to basically to test it in a laboratory and see if the simulated environment actually gets some preclinical data, which will give you approval for taking it to the clinical trials. So that is something I'll talk about in detail in the next sessions. Like there is a whole bunch of regulatory hurdles and regulatory pathways. And now I'll be basically walking through about what is this process of innovating and how you can use this process to develop your next medical devices and use the expertise from professors and your fellow members to develop a medical device over a period of time. So need identification, so strategic focus, observation, problem identification, need statement development. So strategic focus is something I have talked about. So what is you are primarily you are inclined to? You might be interested in different technologies, but there would be certain clinical need that you wanted to solve. Basically, you could be personally be affected by certain medical condition that your friends or family might have, and you would wanted to go and observe that specific clinical need in a hospital and gather data as much as possible and see what is the existing solutions, what is the existing gaps and pain points, and what are the existing value add that you can do. So if it's going to be a small value add, it is going to be an incremental. But if you have identified existing gaps which nobody has solved, and that is going to be a tremendous a value proposition when it comes to market. So that is why developing initial prototype would be very crucial, and taking that to the market is very important. So taking it to market, and whether you are going to be doing the marketing and sales force, or by yourself, or through some distribution channel, or through licensing. So that is going to be a whole different chapter. But in order to develop in your initial product, you need to first understand what is the steps that you involve in terms of strategic focus. Strategic focus could be a whole different ideas, like one could be diabetes, one could be related to heart diseases. So you would figure out a lot of these problems, and you would chart out all these problem statements and all these things that you wanted to solve, and you would go about adding these need statements, need observations. You go to hospitals and you do observations, and you make problem identification, need statement development. So strategic focus will have certain criteria. The criteria would be basically, what is your mission? Your mission could be, I wanted to solve cancer, I wanted to cure cancer. And your strengths and weaknesses could be, you could be good at designing medical devices, but you are not that good at writing code. So you'll have to probably look for some some expertise from your fellow members or professors, how you could acquire that skill, or you can partner with someone. So, and then acceptance criteria. So acceptance criteria is something that the market acceptance, whether if a product goes to a market, whether that will be accepted or not. So strategic focus will have a lot of these combination of things where you would specifically focus certain area, and you would say that this is what I want to do. So one of the these are some of the examples. For example, an engineer with a needle phobic mother decides to design an alternative method for administrating daily insulin. This is one method. So other method could be a business student, going across some, an African village and finding a problem, and he's personally inspired to solve specific problems. So each one of us would have certain problem statements in mind, and when you look at the problems in general, it would be really great, but all of them cannot solve all the problems. So each specific person will have a unique perspective about clinical need and a problem statement, and how you can go about solving those problems. So I was talking about acceptance criteria. So acceptance criteria is is there a clinical need? Is there a market potential? Is there a regulatory challenge? So you need to figure out all these possibilities and see if the product, if the clinical need, the problem that you're going to solve will fall under all these criteria, and if it is going to be something worthwhile for you to go ahead with that problem statement. So for example, a pneumonia could be a problem statement. Someone could be developing some diagnostic tool or a screening tool that they have been personally personally be affected. So some of those things are like
somebody who is personally affected by a particular disease. For example, somebody in family having a rare disease.
Yeah.
He may be passionate about that disease, but that may not make any market sense.
Exactly.
To enter into market with such a device which will...
Exactly. Yeah, for example, hemophilia. So it's a rare disease, and there could not be a market for that. Right. So,
Myasthenia gravis. Myasthenia gravis is a disease. There are very few in the world, about 1 to 2%. If anyone go in that area, that I will research on that, how to overcome, then he will, actually medicine are limited also for myasthenia gravis, because no one want to take, actually it prefers only medical doctor have signed that this medicine is applicable for that or not. Then why, then we have to focus on marketing, not for our concern.
Yeah, so you need to see if your objective is to take this product to market, and you want to see there is a million people or different markets across global markets that you want to see this product to be deployed, and you should take into all consideration, market consideration, regulatory consideration, whether who's going to be paying for the device, whether you have the necessary capital for investing into that product development process. So all these considerations, and what is the time required, potential health outcomes. So some of the problems might be a high risk device, and it would take long time for innovators to come. So when you...
Even regulatory challenges can make the device conversion to market such a long process that it doesn't make many times it doesn't make sense to proceed in that direction. Right.
Yes, so when you compare with existing other problem statements, you might want to go to that specific problem statements. So these are some of the...
so unless, for example, there are companies with deep pockets and long time frame, so they can probably hit like newer startups. They should not probably go into areas in which bigger companies would be much more equipped to handle stuff.
Yes, so you want to look at the opportunities that have a potential for something viable, something it can be commercially sustainable and scalable.
Sir, so like if you're developing something new, like there has been like for the very first time you're coming up with a product, none of them like companies, big giants have developed a product in that department, then how will you estimate the market size and all that parameters?
Sure. So there are ways. For example, can you give an example which particular problem you're talking about?
Like
Or for example, if there is a if there is a problem.
Sir, if I come up with an algorithm for detecting pneumothorax from chest X-rays, I did come up with an algorithm that's working supremely fine and everything is going well, but none of the giants have come up with those things. So I want to go into the market and estimate like what could be the market size and revenue. Then how will I evaluate?
Sure. So you need to look at what is the kind of existing solutions which are available. What is the alternative that you are proposing? Whether the alternative that you are proposing, is it going to be a small differentiator or is it going to be a huge differentiator? That you will have to, you cannot just be passionate about your solution. You will have to think the other way. You will have to think what are the existing ways that people are getting this particular problem solved.
Generally, like pneumothorax manual is the like radiologist sit and go through the X-rays and they tell them.
Yeah.
So like they usually take around 1 to 2 hours for going through.
So pneumothorax, what happens is they check variables like grunting and all these things, and they look at how symptoms. They look at symptoms. Usually doctors, nurses, they are well trained and they look at the symptoms. And you need to look at. You need to speak with. You won't. There is no direct answer for this. You will have to spend. You will have to spend hours and days at hospitals and see. Sit in the ward and get permission from the doctors and see how existing practices are, and then you basically document everything, and then come back with your labs and see what are the pain points, what are the things which are not something that not just one hospital. We need to do it at different places and see what is the existing state of the art, state of the practice. Then you need to come up with some clinical need. That clinical need will translate into a problem solving, the specific need statement that you're developing will define the product. The specifications that, it could be.
For example, can you give an example in sense or terms of your device, that neonatal ventilator?
Yeah.
Or something?
Yeah.
So how did you estimate the market size for that? Means, did you conduct a formal market survey, or did you just? How did you come up with that? What is the market size and whether it makes sense for you to enter into that space?
So there are traditional players big companies like the GE Healthcare, they have access to all these big hospitals and traditional neonatal ventilators, and they have local distributors. The market dynamics work like this: distributors and the dealers. And if you try to compete with them, it is not going anywhere. It is not going anywhere because you cannot compete with them, and you will have to have $1 billion investment to go about developing something totally new. So then you are making something disruption in the market. So a disruption happens when there is a solution which is totally different from existing solutions, and it is creating an alternative pathway than existing. So that's where innovation comes into place. So the market size, as a startups, some of them can afford, if it is well funded, like DBTS funded, and there is a budget for you to do a market research, and you can hire some firm to do a 6 months market research, and they will give you specific data what to do. But most of them might not have that kind of a bandwidth, and nobody gives a budget for all these market research. So you will have to do your own kind of so the ecosystem that you are trying to solve, you are trying to interact with. So you will have to look into the breakdown. So that's where market segmentation comes into place. Market segmentation, which I'll talk about. So market segmentation, what is the market that you are targeting? The whole therapeutics market, respiratory therapeutics marketing can be like $8.5 billion market. But how many, what is the acquirable market and who are willing to pay? So when you identify who are willing to pay, that you will only know by some sample size that you get data, and you can come up with some number that makes sense. What is the actual market for your specific product? So the market can be like $1 billion market. The respiratory therapeutics, neonatal can be, it's always $1 billion market. But when you do a market segmentation, you come with some small number, some 10 CR, 15 CR in this specific market. That is the acquirable market. So for example, we were doing a lot of this market research and we were trying to speak with a lot of doctors. We understood that we cannot directly compete with some big players like GE or healthcare. What we can do is start with the lower bottom of the pyramid, like the secondary care private hospitals, tertiary care private hospitals, who might be willing to buy. So that's where you need to find your early adopters for any medical device that you come up with. Early adopters, like which doctor is passionate, which doctor is passionate about solving a problem, and he doesn't want to use the existing big expensive devices which would put on the treatment cost for existing patients, but he wants to with the same capabilities are much more easier, simpler, faster. He can do it better from existing smaller companies doing a better way of doing things. So that's where a brand comes into play when choosing these things. The doctors always look for something that is much more efficient and effective. So if you look at this particular chart, so the heart diseases, pulmonary conditions, mental disorders. So one way, what is the treated prevalence is that between the year and what you can see is the spending in dollars, between this year. And here is approximate change in the total healthcare spending. So if you could see the change in total healthcare spending, so there is a change. Highest change is in the heart disease. So heart disease. So which means that that is an indicator for you to look at how potential your clinical need can be. So if you are finding something in specific need in cardiovascular diseases, in heart diseases, so you can look at the market potential by looking at the spending. What is the spending by the government? What is the spending by the for new treatments, for new conditions? So if you look at the statistics, you will know how much spending is being done for a specific treatment and whether there is a potential or not.
This is global statistics or?
This is US statistics. Yeah. So if you look at the disparities in healthcare, this is an image where this is a printed artificial limb which costs between $35 to $40, whereas in US it costs anywhere between $6,000 to $35,000. So this kind of disparities where innovators can build something unique and can try to reach the masses by developing these solutions and deploying it. So whenever you come up with something, a disruptive solution or a solution which has a huge need, you need to first test that idea by a small pilot study or a small clinical study, and that data can be very useful for you to when you are going for a large scale pivotal studies and deployment, sales and distribution. So this is one example where you could see how much disparities in terms of cost and the quality can be the same. So I'll tell you two examples. One is there are two innovators, and two innovators approach a doctor and they ask, we wanted to develop a medical device, and we are just looking for some a compelling need, a specific need, which clinical need, and we wanted to so one innovator is asking, I wanted to have an interview with you, and he's having a predefined questionnaire kind of a thing. So the other innovator just wants to go into the surgery room and just observe how the way things for a few days. So what do you think the maximum potential for innovation in both these scenarios? Which person, whether the person who is interviewing or the person who is observing? Observing. So the person who is observing, so this can be applied for any of you who wants to develop something. So in order to develop something, you should first go to some hospitals and get permission and just stay there and see how things are happening. Just observe, get permission for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and just note down all the things which are happening, not just the problems. What are the exact things? For example, if you are solving a problem in neonatal ICU, or if you are solving a problem in surgery, surgical tools, implants, So you go to that specific lab or operation theater, and you stay there and you observe things. So